There are little more subject matters that can have the tone of variety than the handling of death in animated sitcoms. Whether it's the death of an antagonist, or the death of a family member, or in some cases both, it can lead to what's known as a very special episode. So, we come to The Simpsons. Good show, back in the 90s at least. One of the defining elements of The Simpsons was when it was in its prime, it had this seamless ability to switch between absolute hilarity and absolute emotion within seconds and not missing a beat. The show's capacity for emotion was intense, having episodes centered around concepts such as Homer believing he's going to die after eating a piece of dodgy fish, and also him buying Lisa a pony to make her feel better, or lest we forget, do it for her. One of the episodes that left a significant impact on the show's legacy was Season 7's Mother Simpson. It reintroduced Homer's mother Mona into his life after he thought she was dead for decades. It was a huge moment for him. However, she's taken away from him just as fast to escape the FBI and Mr. Burns, which culminates in one of the most emotional endings to an animated TV show ever, with Homer having now seen his mother safely escape, simply sitting on his car and watching the stars. This moment is just iconic and beautiful, and not many things in animation have really come close to matching its subtle aesthetic beauty and emotional value, as you can tell by the fact it's been used in about several million vaporwaves since. Mona returns again in Season 15's My Mother the Carjacker, after Homer finds a coded message from her while she's on the run. He almost gets her back for good this time, after she's acquitted, but Mr. Burns traps her into confessing that she's signed under fake names at national parks, which is a federal offence. This ends with Homer believing her to have died after she hijacks a prison bus and causes it to crash into a lake and explode and cause a rockfall. Homer desperately tries to find any sign of her survival through coded messages, but deep down, he knows she's gone, and he's trying to comfort himself. And we'll see his family will help him come to terms with it. Ironically, Mona did survive, and sent another coded message through the paper, but Homer read the wrong articles, so he never saw it. Season 19 comes along, and with it, we have Mona Simpson's last living appearance in the third part of the trilogy, Mona Leaves Her. Clever. Now this is where the cracks show. As I said, the classic era focused a lot more on the emotion over the spectacle, and this is well past the classic era. The first half of the episode is solid. It's a huge juxtaposition to their first and second meetings, which are so heartwarming and full of love by comparison. Homer's emotional state and coldness this time around towards his constantly abandoning and randomly reappearing mother is totally understandable, given what he had gone through in the first two episodes that she was in, so you can't really fault him for wanting to break that cycle. And I have to say, Mona's actual death scene is really quite beautifully handled. Homer comes downstairs to try and make peace with her, sees her down by the fire, and then the realization that she's dead hits him like a brick. The end of the act simply lingers with Homer's solitary, yet so innocent cry out to his mother. In the following scenes, we see Homer utterly depressed, questioning what happens after death in a raw and almost childlike way to the religious people in his life, such as Apu and Ned. The Homer of Season 15 onwards was always considerably more emotionally sensitive than he previously was, but this is one of the few times where the regression actually works. As he is so clearly hurt at this point, it's easy to see why he tried to find any solace that he can. If the episode had solely focused on the fallout of Mona's death, much in the way that Round Springfield focused on Lisa's grief following the death of Bleeding Gums Murphy, this episode could have been a modern classic. Speaking of it conceptually, this is an episode where Homer not only loses his mother, but she dies believing that he will never forgive her. There is so much you can do with that. You can go down a self-exploration route, where Homer and Abe question if they treated her too harshly, or recount memories from the past. You can have Homer journey to find the best place to release her ashes, so she can be with the environment that she loved. You can even have a moment where Burns even hears of her passing, and lets go of his vendetta towards her. But no. Of course they had to go with this stupid James Bond parody subplot. Of course they did. Modern Simpsons has a long-running disease in which it becomes more and more reliant on whole plot pop culture references and celebrity guests. And this is no exception. James Bond was finally becoming a hot property again after Daniel Craig repopularised the franchise with 2006's Casino Royale. Mona Leaves Her aired in 2008, the year of Quantum of Solace. There's honestly a time and a place, but could have chose a different episode, guys. Mona leaves instructions for Homer in her will on releasing her ashes. Go to Springfield Monument Park and climb to the highest point. At exactly 3 o'clock, release her ashes. How oddly specific! As it turns out, it stops a planned missile launch. This was absolutely the wrong way to go about handling the death of the mother to one of animation's most iconic characters. The whole secret plan thing puts an entirely new spin on her death. She gives Homer strict instructions on where and when to spread her ashes, which is an area which just so happens to be the place of Mr. Burns' latest anti-environmental scheme that he was doing on that precise day. Mona hadn't done anything quite so audacious in her first 2 appearances, especially one that relied on luck as much as this, and not to mention wind conditions. As well as this, everything lined up far too perfectly for her to have just randomly died, and implies that Mona decided to actively commit suicide in order to force a guilt-ridden Homer to initiate a last-ditch screw you at Mr. Burns through her own ashes unknowingly. This is just cruel writing on many levels, and by rights brings into question how much Mona truly valued her son in contrast to how much she valued her missions. She used him like a pawn, even in death, to accomplish it. It reveals a whole new side of ruthless efficiency to Mona, sacrificing herself to get the job done, losing out on so many things like watching her grandchildren grow up in what time she had left. God. The plan, of course, was needlessly convoluted despite its supposed simplicity. She didn't even need to die for it to happen, or actively rob her son of the chance to make things right before she died. Effectively, this just leaves us with the thought that Mona had always planned to use her estranged family to accomplish her mission, despite the danger that it would put them in, and reinforcing that neglect that Homer had fought so hard to protect himself against. She left Homer once again, only this time for good, and it's honestly kind of cruel. I have no idea if this unfortunate implication regarding her death was intentional or not, but if it was, then that unlocks a whole new layer of darkness. The thing is, the episode would have just worked so much better if they didn't try to make it something that it wasn't. Modern Simpsons has almost got a desperation about it in the sense that it needs to remain funny at all times, that it needs to have many things going on to make it entertaining, and it can't let itself slow down too much too often, even if it would benefit the story. Which is why they put in a James Bond sequence into what could have been a touching episode of Homer trying to come to terms with his mum's death. It didn't belong in my view, and just convoluted what could have been a beautiful story about guilt, grief, and Homer's road to coming to terms with her loss, especially when compared to the masterfully written Martha Simpson and the legitimately decent My Mother the Carjacker. What the episode does do well is the last minute of the ending. Homer unleashes his mum's ashes into the sky again, and we see a montage of her moments in the show. It's lovely, but it also makes me think of what could have been. Just think of how much of an aesthetic parallel it would have been for the end of the episode's third act, after spending time with Abe, would be Homer just going up to the park at 3 PM to release her ashes. We'd forget about the Bond scene, and just let the episode's original ending play out. We watch Homer watching her fly away as he reflects and reminisces on their relationship. It would have been a subtle ending, and a gorgeous one, but it just feels like they're afraid to put the humanity back into The Simpsons. Homer's relationship with his mother is complex, and her main consistency is that she is incredibly inconsistent around him. She always leaves. He never successfully gets to bond with her for very long before she's taken away again, and in a sense, it contributes as to why Homer is such a fundamentally emotionally regressive and broken individual, attributing his lack of a mother as to why he turned to food and alcohol. Mona does probably return one last time in Season 23's strangely titled How I Met Your Mother, to give a sense of closure within a dream. But again, if your best way of giving closure is through another whole plot pop culture reference, this time an Inception parodying dream sequence instead of, handling when she was freshly dead and not because you used spare change to give Glenn Close, then priorities need to be looked at when you're determining the fates of these characters, as beloved or enigmatic as they are. Other shows like BoJack Horseman explore how a mother can shape a person and their life. In BoJack's case, he was neglected and abused through childhood, which basically turned him into the shambolic mess of a man that he is. When she dies, BoJack gives a funeral eulogy that is honestly one of the greatest encapsulations of grief ever done in animation. So it's disappointing that The Simpsons couldn't go down a similar route and be in tune with Homer's emotions through the whole episode, instead of doing the whole secret plan storyline. Not only did it cripplingly derail the resolution of Mona's struggle of trying to be with her family but avoiding the feds, but if we assume she committed suicide, then it also derailed her characterization. When Mona had to leave, she had to escape lest be captured or worse. This time, Homer's emotions were used as collateral damage to do one final blow to the miserable old tyrant who has it in for her. Speaking of, Mr. Burns' whole role in the episode just basically equates to a generic supervillain. Since he's been the outright antagonist of the first 2 Mona episodes, it does make sense to have him back. Those two do have history. History that Burns seems to have probably forgotten about, or just doesn't care, since there's no reference or acknowledgement from him that it's Mona's ashes. Or maybe it's just high on Aoife again. We've all come to accept him just casually forgetting about Homer anyway. But that rivalry will probably now never see a true resolution. I only wish Mona Leaveser could have given a true emotional send-off to Homer's mother, after the previous 2 episodes handled their bond so well. But unfortunately, the precedence that The Simpsons had set itself came back to haunt it in the modern era. It's a problem modern Simpsons has. It's too nervous to commit to a hard-hitting direction as it once did, and it remains in this weird space of mediocrity. And the handling of Mona's death truly leaves us with a feeling of what could have been, if they had just simply let the story be as simple as Homer losing his mum and coping with his grief. But if there's one thing I can take from this episode, the Defender is the greatest Simpsons weapon since the board with a nail in it.
All hail the Defender!
Channel Pup has been growing more than I could ever have anticipated over this very short space of time, and I'm absolutely honoured to see so many viewers participating in discussions and really enjoying my little projects here. But it's not without its obstacles. I'm currently a student studying film and television, and if I want to afford the general costs that come with living, unfortunately YouTube revenue just can't always cut that cheese. I recently moved in with my girlfriend's family, but this is not a permanent thing, it's just for the summer. And last year I've done the whole act of balancing YouTube, balancing a job, and balancing university, and trust me, the content suffers every single time. So to support this channel to maintain the same quality of content and upload schedule, and to just keep making the stuff you guys really seem to be enjoying, I really do urge you to check out my Patreon link in the description below. And in return, you can get early access previews to the special Channel Pup events such as Marvelous Tales of Spider-Man Episode 2, as well as my upcoming Patreon exclusive playlist, Pup's Project Room, which is all unlockable with a pledge of just $1 or more. Now, the world's a tricky place. Not everybody is made of money, and that's fine. Just please be here for my videos. Please don't stop coming back to join me on these discussions, because it means so much to me, guys, really. Well, I guess I best be hitting the old dusty trail. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've been Channel Pup, and I'll think of a better catchphrase next time. Now please leave me alone!